Hello, and welcome to Corruption Chronicles podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a subject I've mentioned many times on my website, also in my online course, and I think even in this podcast. It's critical information that you may need if you're looking for information from a public agency, especially if that agency has something to hide. Often you can find good information on an agency website. However, if you're doing research, say as a journalist or a concerned citizen, you may need more than you can lay your hands on by doing desk research. So sometimes you can just go to the agency, ask them for the information you need, and it will be forthcoming and responsive to your request. Sometimes it won't. If the information is not provided, or if you encounter roadblocks that are obstructing you, you need a more powerful tool. That tool is a written public records request. And the law surrounding such requests is similar across the country, although each state will have its own, and even the federal government has one. So I can tell you as a former mayor and council member that sometimes it's as difficult to get information about something fishy as an elected official, maybe even more, as it is as a member of the public. So let me give you an example. When I was a city council member, the previous council had voted to provide a large sum of money to a supervisor's wife, county supervisor's wife, to her project to find housing for the homeless. That supervisor has subsequently been identified as the recipient of multiple bribes. So I thought it might be a good idea to see the accounting for the funds that had been allocated to her. But to this day, I have not seen them. If they hadn't been properly used and accounted for, the state could have requested the money back. Am I annoyed? Yeah, but even just making the request at least changed the trajectory of that particular funding of that project. The next year, the funds were not allocated to her, they were allocated to a different agency. So before I introduce our guest, I want to recognize and thank our host, and that's LJ Stead of Purple Banter. And later in the podcast, he may have his own questions about public records. So I'm hoping he'll jump into the conversation if he has comments or questions. Joining me today is Kevin Rice, and Kevin has advised many local government experts and concerned citizens on how to get the information they seek from their government. Years ago, I asked my attorney if he could provide me with a template that I could use for public records requests. And he said to me, well, the best person for that is Kevin Rice. Nobody does it better than Kevin. No attorney I've ever seen has ever done a better public records request. So that's the public records request that we're bringing to you today. And it is available to download. It's available on my website, debbiepeterson.com. That's DebbiePeterson.com. So Kevin, take it away. We're going to talk through a template, I think, aren't we?
Yeah, let's hit the points. Good morning to you, and
good morning.
Thanks for having me. So I don't actually originally know where I learned about public records requests, but it became obvious to me that I wanted to seek information about my local government, and eventually discovered that California has a Public Records Act in law that allows any citizen to request public documents, and government is required to produce a copy. Of course, there's similar public records acts with other states, and the federal government has a thing called the Freedom of Information Act, which pretty much everybody's heard of that. Yeah. It's one of my pet peeves when people talk about Freedom of Information Act or FOIA when they go to their local government. And FOIA does not apply to state and local governments. You have to look at your state's laws. And in California, we have the California Public Records Act, which is chaptered in
Kevin, government. Let me interrupt you for a minute.
Yeah.
Would FOIA apply if, for instance, the agency is using federal funds for a project, or no. would it still wouldn't apply?
No, you would have perhaps a FOIA to the federal government as to the origination of those funds, or to their grant process, or documents you're seeking from the feds. But if you're seeking documents from a state or local government, then you'd use your state records acts.
Thank you. So sorry, I interrupted you midstream there.
No, but that's a good point, because sometimes you can use multiple record requests to different agencies to tackle one problem. So if you're dealing with federal money, you might request a Freedom of Information Act request to the federal government or federal agency that provided those grants or monies, and then a similar records request to the local agency that's receiving those monies. If there's an issue involving the state and the county, or the state and a city, then you might issue 2 public records requests to those agencies. And it could be interesting to see if you get results that are the same or different. If one agency feels they want to withhold something, keep it a little secretive, well, maybe the other agency will go ahead and give you a copy of that. And so it's actually useful to issue multiple requests when there's multiple agencies involved. Even if you think you're going to get the exact same thing, somebody might withhold or lose it, and you got a better shot of getting the information you seek.
So you would want to make an identical request apart from who you address it to at the top, basically.
Right. Yeah. So if you have an agency that's being particularly troublesome, you can go to another agency that might be a little more transparent with giving out information.
So what made you did say, it's true. I've known you for, I don't know, over 10 years now. And I don't know what triggered your first interest in public records requests. Is that a story that's of interest?
It probably would be if I could remember it. But yeah, at some point I realized FOIA is out there, Freedom of Information Act. And then just doing digging, I was like, oh, I can request copies of things. And so it's been very useful. And agencies are very annoyed when you request information, especially if it's either voluminous or if it's something that they're touchy about and they don't really want to reveal it. One thing that's particularly touchy is if you request copies of your local legislators' emails, whether that's a council person, a county level supervisor, or an agency director, the mayor. They have private conversations with other people, and because they're acting in their role as a government official, you can request a copy. So that's one instance where multiple requests can really come in handy. So if you have a county level officer or a county supervisor who's having a conversation with the local city councilman, you send one request to the county and one request to the city. Maybe if the county supervisor doesn't want to give it up, maybe the city person will. And so you can, it's useful to hit them from both angles.
It occurs to me that it really is important to say, if you can't get the information, it may just be that public agencies they really often find the public a pain. Yes. We get in the way of their getting on with their work. We ask questions that may create what I call a brouhaha. They don't like any kind of controversy. They don't like news coverage unless it's positive about the agency and they can control it. And one of the most important things to be aware of is if you're getting pushback, it's really worth digging harder and pushing harder. And that's when you need this more than just walking in and asking for the information. I came across something in the news recently in the news. There is a water agency in Central California that has diverted $25 million of water over, I think it's the last few years. And of course, the director of that agency has gotten rich, as well as a few others. And I was fascinated by that because I had actually written about the dangers of one party controlling all the water in a county and controlling where the lines go and how the water is actually diverted through what they call turnouts, which is where they go in and they can redirect water. It's like a great big wheel. You'll see them if you ever pay much attention to the infrastructure. I know you know that, Kevin, as a firefighter, but I never did until I started working with local agencies. But the thing I wanted to raise is that was a water district. And people pay very little attention to districts, and we haven't mentioned them yet either, but they are local agencies, and they're often the ones where things go, well, wrong, where your money or taxpayers' money goes into the hands of suppliers and contractors and agency executives and public officials. So I wanted to put that out there and suggest to people that it's really important to make sure that you are also paying attention to to the districts or the smaller local agencies that you may not have been aware of. And anyway, I wanted to throw that in there. So that's really current news. Kevin, did you want to carry on? Sorry to interrupt you again.
Well, that brings up some good points. Corruption's everywhere, but in smaller agencies, it has its own flavor. The smaller the agency is, usually the more uninformed they are as to the law, and they feel they can do things just at a whim. And so when you throw the Public Records Act at them, they'll, maybe they've never been hit with that before and they blow it off. Bigger agencies know they can't do that. Bigger agencies use the power of their attorneys to blow you off. And smaller agencies tend to just blow you off. The interesting thing is they can do anything they want to you, even if it's illegal, until you get an attorney and go to court. And that puts everybody in a tough spot because your activists and your watchdogs are typically people that don't have the money to just go out and hire an attorney and fight government. So you have to be a little conscious or mindful of that when you communicate and send a records request. You try to be nice. Maybe don't send the meanest request you could, asking for the most things that you could, because that's going to upset them. Sometimes it's useful to do your records requests in two parts. Maybe ask for the more benign stuff on your first round, because then you have a better chance of getting those things quickly, knowing that you've got some things that are going to make them nervous or upset them, and you wait until your second round to request those things, because you may never get them unless you do hire an attorney.
Yeah, I've noticed that, I've always preached to people that start being nice. You don't need to get aggressive or confrontational until you get to the point that you need to get aggressive or confrontational. And then if your public records request doesn't work, that's when you really need to get the public out, get people out at meetings and screaming and hollering, and get the press out. And by screaming and hollering, I don't mean literally. It's better not to. It usually works better with folks not to scream at them. But anyway, get them out there making noise about it. And but start with the public records request, because even when you're going to court, you will have a better hearing and more credibility if you go through the proper steps to get things done first, and you'll have a better case later.
Very much. And you want to have what's called clean hands when you go to court. So if you have a lot of angry correspondence where you're calling names, it makes you look like a jerk in court. So even if they're absolutely corrupt and evil and you can prove it, just be diplomatic and be blunt and straightforward. And when you go to court, you're the victim. Hey, I'm just trying to get what I'm entitled to get, and they're not producing it. And it's a little bit hard. And I tend to get a little snarky when I write stuff. It's not exactly calling names, but maybe it's a little bit insulting. Yeah, but I try to keep that down, because you want to look like you're just a good citizen that is trying to get some information that you have a right to have. It's a fundamental right to have copies of what government's doing, what government business is, especially in California. It's a right under the California Constitution, up there with free speech and all your other things, to have access to what your government is doing, because it is your government and you're entitled to know what government's doing.
And I would take it a step further. I would say it is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And it can't be that if the people don't engage. It's our institution. That all comes from the Brown Act, which we'll talk about another day. I had another interesting situation yesterday. I was speaking with a journalist, and but before I go to that, sorry, I want to go back to what you said, Kevin, about being nice. The other thing about being a little bit poker faced about things and not giving your hand away is that it allows you also to keep the agency from knowing what you're doing if you're going to take things further, if you need to take things further. So it's better not to give your hand away. It's better just to be very matter of fact, very professional, courteous, considerate, and do what you're going to do. But don't give them a heads up by losing your temper over it.
Yeah, very much so. And that brings up a side point. Government doesn't have the right to withhold information based on what they think or feel you might use it for. So in one case, I asked for a list of property holders that had a relationship going with a local government agency. And it was in regards to air monitoring, and they'd allowed the local government agency to put air monitors in their yards. And the agency didn't want to give me that because they cited privacy. And they said, well, we don't know this guy. He might go harass or harangue these local residents in some way, knowing that they've put air monitors in their yard. We don't want to give Kevin that information. Well, California Public Records Act says you can't withhold information that would otherwise be public just based on what you think they might do or what you can imagine they might do. It's still a public document. So you don't have to reveal or justify your purpose for asking for information. You have a right to that information. And I know your audience is broad, but I just want to stress that. And let me just read you a sentence from the California Constitution to emphasize your rights. And this is in the California Constitution, Article 1, Section 3. The people have the right of access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business, and therefore the meetings of public bodies and the writings of public officials and agencies shall be open to public scrutiny. So if your mayor is having an email chat with a developer or another government official, you have a right to ask for a copy of that. And they'll often say, well, that's my private personal email. Well, no, it's not, because you're conducting public business. You have a right to see their text messages. And those can get really sticky. And you never know if they gave you everything or not, because you can't seize their phone and look at it. But hopefully they're being transparent. And again, that's why it's useful to do a Public Records Act to the other person on the other end of those text messages. And maybe they'll give you more, and then you can prove that the other person withheld, makes them look bad. But if they're having a conversation with the developer, well, he's a private person and you can't do a Public Records Act request on him, only to agencies and officials.
You know, that's something that's always been interesting to me, is that we have people who are contracting with our government to do projects using our tax dollars. And yet, if they're private companies, we don't have the right to go in and ask for information on that project. Somehow that seems a bit skewed to me. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's very limited opening in the Records Act and in the Brown Act when a company is involved on the board of an agency that has public officials sitting on that board. There are some times when you can request public records of a private agency, but normally you cannot.
It's difficult. The thing I have discovered is that the ones who are on the up and up will very quickly provide you with really good information, usually better information than you get from public sites, because they have their spreadsheets and their documents. And if they've got their house in order, you'll know right away. And that's one thing that I've discovered is every once in a while, you'll find something in government well, I won't say you might often find something in government that you think's a bit sneaky or a bit off. And not everything that looks that way is. And so
Correct.
I want to encourage people to do your homework first before you make any decisions about whether there's really something there or not. If there is something there, the more you dig, the more you'll get, and it spreads often into quite a wide network that would surprise you. So if you find that you're digging and you're just really not coming up with anything that's too worrisome, then just let it go. And but because if it's really something, you're gonna start seeing things that will trouble you that are related. I wanted to mention a conversation I had yesterday with a journalist, and I can't go into the details because the story hasn't been written yet. But she was livid, absolutely livid. And I was livid when she told me what she had. She had gone into our local planning department and asked for a document about something that she had some concerns about. And this was the day before yesterday. And she'd seen the file. And being a canny journalist, she took a photo of the file. So she knew that file existed. And in fact, there were two files, and which was fine. They were on different issues surrounding the same property. And she went in the next day to complete her public records request. They asked for her name and her occupation, which in California is illegal. You can't insist on that. You do not have to give that information when you're requesting information or speaking in a public meeting. And although it can sometimes, it facilitates things. If you don't have a problem with it, go ahead and give it. But if you feel there might be an issue, you are not required to do that. And so when she went in the second day, they asked for that. She said, no, I don't have to give you that. And they told her the file was lost. They couldn't find the file. It was gone. And so she said, well, I think she tried again a little later. And there was a member of the public listening in who was horrified, which is nice to have a witness. When she asked again, they said, well, we can't give it to you. And because she said, look, I've got a photo. I know there's a file, because they had then tried the thing of, well, we don't have a file. And in the end, what had happened is the county attorney had gone in and taken the file, not left copies with the planning department. And so she couldn't get it because the attorney had it, and which is, of course, illegal. But it was infuriating to her, and even infuriating to me when I hear things like that. That's what makes me do these podcasts, because that attorney knows she can't do that. And every time this journalist goes and requests something, they send it to the attorney, and eventually the attorney releases it because she has to. But she stalls and makes it as difficult as possible, which is illegal. In fact,
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So yeah, that occurred to me. I knew what she was doing all along. Every step she took along the way was illegal, the attorney and the planning department. But and then that tells you they've got something to hide, because if they didn't, they wouldn't have sent it to the attorney. And in most cases, unless you threaten a lawsuit, and you don't ever want to threaten a lawsuit, because the minute you do that, that gives them the opportunity to go into closed sessions meetings, and then you never hear anything about it again. So yes, do not ever threaten a lawsuit, because it will shut down your ability to make whatever you're working on, to keep it public and to keep them speaking in public about it. So I asked you a question again and went on. There are some timeframes, aren't there? So what happens is, so this attorney is keeping these files usually for about 30 days. Is that legal, Kevin?
Well, in California, they have 10 days to provide you with a response. One of those responses can be an extension to give us 14 more days. So 24 days is the maximum. However, it's a little bit unclear if the response has to include copies of what you're seeking. The law says they have to tell you the documents that pertain to your request. And it depends on your reading of the law if they actually have to produce the documents, or just say, yeah, we've got those, and it's going to take us a while to put them together. And that'd be a question for an attorney if you got into that fight. My assertion is that they're supposed to produce it. It's very clear in the California Records Act that nothing shall be construed to enable them to delay. So if there's a copy of a file in a drawer, they can't just sit on it for 24 days just to sit on it. They're supposed to produce it right then and there. But there are times when you ask for things like a copy of emails or something that's buried, and it would be very reasonable for them to need to dig those out. And then sometimes you might be asking for archives that are boxed away in the attic, and it might actually be reasonable to go much longer than 24 days to dig those out. So you try to be mindful and work with them on those accounts. But if a document was emailed to all the board members yesterday, that it doesn't take 10 days to pull it up and email a copy to you, which is another point. In California, you can request electronic copies, which means if it's an email, they should just be able to email it to you. If it's some sort of an electronic Word, Excel, or Adobe PDF file, you have a right to get those files in Word, Excel, or PDF format. And there was an instance that both of us are familiar with where a local city councilman, in fact, a mayor, was trying to get a hold of the original Excel file with numbers in it. And they kept giving him a paper scan copy, which of course he wanted to work with the numbers and play with it. And they kept giving him paper printouts, which then of course you'd have to go enter it into Excel yourself. And you wouldn't see the formulas that they were using because you're not getting that on the printout. And you have a right to get the actual Excel file. Now, if they're using some special accounting software, they don't have to convert it to the format you like. If they give you the proprietary accounting software file and you don't have a copy of that software to open it, that's not their problem to convert it for you. But you do have a right to get the original copy of whatever electronic file they hold.
So the reason that the mayor, now mayor, council member at the time, wanted that file in an Excel format was because he was a scientist. He is a scientist, and the information that was coming in was based on a scientific study that was skewed. So he wanted to be able to do a proper analysis of it. And there may be circumstances that arise where that's important. And sometimes you won't know it's important until you've got the response back. So better just to ask for the originals in the first place and then fight for them if you don't get them.
Yeah, and electronic copies, one of the tricks agencies use is, well, that's voluminous. We have to print that out. It's going to take us some time. And you say, no, it doesn't. You just email and hit send. It takes 2 seconds. They're reluctant to give you the originals. Maybe it's the Word or Excel or PowerPoint document they're working on. And they'll say, well, we don't trust that you're not going to edit it and then purport that to be the original after you've made some changes. Mm-hmm. They use these excuses. Or maybe there's some hidden metadata in that document that might show prior edits or that sort of thing. So they can get really touchy about giving electronic copies, but they'll want to give you paper copies sometimes so they can frustrate you because the law allows them to charge a reasonable charge for photocopies. And so if they have a 1,000-page document that you're looking for, they're going to say, well, that's 10 cents a page and that'll be $100, and try to slow you down. And you say, no, just give me the Excel or the Adobe document and it's an email. It doesn't cost you anything. They cannot charge for electronic copies unless you're asking them to put it on a USB drive. They can charge you for that USB drive. But I always put in there, I'm happy to provide a blank USB drive if you need it. Otherwise, just please email it. And that's where I've kind of gotten good at this over time, is learning the ways that they frustrate you. And my public records requests incorporate all these short stops in the beginning and say, if you need a USB drive, just let me know. Oh, yeah, just give me electronic. And that way you don't do these multiple rounds of back and forth of like come in and we'll charge you $100 for copies. No, I asked for electronic. It's right there in my original request.
So it's really a fast track public records request. And although we're in California, we've used a California one, there's a benefit to that for folks because California is probably more litigious and more detail oriented than pretty much anywhere else in the country. However, there are a lot of things in this template that references to laws that are California laws. So if you're not in California, you'll have to Google those laws yourself, but you could write the same letter, basically the same letter, use the template even without that. Often you don't need to go that far. So let's get into the template. Do you have that in front of you, Kevin? Can you see it?
I don't have it right in front of me.
Okay.
If I do, I'd probably have to split my screen up. Do you, if you just want to go through
I've
it?
got it. Yeah. And I think the thing that I like about it most is that it's very professional. And I think that's a really important thing in public records requests that people use spell check and set it up nicely and get someone to help you if you can't do it yourself. So what you always do with yours is you always give it a file number. And people can use whatever file number they want, but you do give it a file number and you reference that. And so the way you do it is you put in the date starting with the year, then the month, and the day in numbers numerically, and then you put hyphen CRPA, which is California Public CRPA, California. What is that? I think I put that backwards. It should be CPRA, California Public Records Act.
Yeah, that came from
that on this template.
I had a local agency that I'd often have more than one records request into at the same time. And because of me, they had to start their own tracking system. And I realized it would be useful to them if I identified which request I was talking about. And they really were upset by the number of records requests I was doing. But they were dealing with a very hot topic and multiple things would come up. And because they dragged their feet, I'd often have something else I wanted before they produced the last thing. They hate this Records Act request because, like every government agency, they're very busy doing their own thing, and they feel like you're sidetracking them. But the bottom line is, you have a right to know what your government is doing, and part of their job is to provide that information when people request it. So I always just produced a reference number, and it usually just be the date. But if you want to number your request in some way, it can be useful.
Well, the other thing about it is for me and for you, we're citizens. We have jobs. We have to work full time to pay our rent. And so if you are making or I'm making multiple public records requests or multiple requests of the same request of different agencies, it's probably helpful even for us in our own filing systems to keep everything straight because it can get quite detailed. So, and then of course, it's the usual things with a letter that you put into this: your name, your address, your city, your zip, your phone and text number. And I always identify whether the number I'm giving them, if the number I'm giving them is text. So if it's a cell phone text, I'll usually say, cell or mobile / text, so that they know that they can make it easy for them to get hold of you. And then, of course, you date it, really important to date it, and you put in the agency name and their information as well. And one of the benefits of putting in all their information, their contact information, is that then you've got it to hand as well. When you pick this up and you give them a call, you've got that in front of you, as well as the reference number, your file number that you put up at in the top right-hand corner. And then something else that I've always found very professional and quite useful is to say how it was delivered. So, and often delivering it in more than one way can be helpful. Is that your experience, Kevin, or does that just cause them too much grief?
I felt it's best to deliver it electronically, but if it was a real important request to me that I felt I might even want to go to court on, I'd drive by and give them a paper copy as well. And I'd try to do it on the same date, so the same date would apply, or you could fax it in. almost more important than that, though, is who you address it to.
Ah,
You can give a records request to any peon at the counter or the water meter guy that comes and reads your water meter and say, I want a copy of all my water meter readings for the last year. But that person may not ultimately know the Records Act, and he might throw it away or ignore it. It's better to get it somebody higher up in the chain. And often more than one person is appropriate. So you could send it to the head of the water department, or maybe a more senior person that you spoke to on the phone that's not just a counter person or a field person. But you could CC the city attorney so that they're aware that you want this treated like a formal request. And because if that person doesn't know about the Records Act, they might just drag their feet on it, or it might go into a pile where the city attorney is going to know, oh, we got time limits that we have to be responsive to this. And so you want to make sure you get it in front of that person. If it involves your local city council or your board or your county supervisors, where there's a board or a committee, you should send a copy to the board clerk and probably the president or the presiding officer of that board. Your board clerk is the one who keeps tracks of all the minutes of the board and has documents. But the president of the board would be a person that you might want to include. And again, the agency's attorney, so they know that this is a formal request. So it's useful to make sure you address it to the right person, and maybe more than one person, so they recognize this is a formal legal request.
I think another person who's going to recognize the importance of numbers and playing by the rules is going to be the chief financial officer of the organization. Especially if you're asking for financial information, they're going to be very nervous about being unresponsive. And I noticed that at one point, if they're not able, this is in California, but these principles apply across the board. If they're not able to provide, or if they're refusing to provide the information, or they can't provide information, it's actually the head of the department who's required to give you that information. It has to come from the head of department. So it may also be a good idea to address it to the head of whatever department you're asking the information from.
Right. So ultimately, you want to send it to the person who has what you're looking for. And if that's not the head of the department, you're seeking how many dog licenses the city issued, you send it to that person. But then you might want to carbon copy it to the head of the department and to the agency's attorney, so you get the most bang for your buck. Or if you feel like we're going to end up in court later, there's no refuting that they got it. They don't have an argument that, like, well, that person didn't really know, and we didn't know this request was out there. No, it went straight to all these people that do know. And it's everything you can do to prevent them from having excuses helps.
And even if it's not going to court, the fact that you've prepared and presented something that could go to court and would stand up in court is in itself a really good accountability tool.
That's what makes them a little more nervous, that it is formally prepared, and they're, boy, we better treat this a little more respectful. Like you said earlier, they have no right to demand your name. If you walk into the counter and say, I want to see a copy of your dog tag log, and that's something that's right there available, they should stick it on the counter right in front of your nose, right then and there. You have a right to go in as an anonymous person, and they can't say, what's your name? Are you a local citizen? What's your purpose for looking at this? Now, it's not illegal for them to ask, but it's illegal for them to demand that,
to require, right?
Yeah, because anybody's going to be curious, like, well, what do you want to see that for? And you could say, well, I really don't want to tell you. Or you could just tell them, I think you've been overcharging for dog licenses, and I want to see how many dog licenses were issued last year. So what isn't helpful is when you try to be evasive and then you want to go to court later or push it farther, they could say, well, we don't know that you came in because you just came in anonymously and wouldn't give your name. So ultimately, if you think you're going to fight over this thing, it's just best to put your name on it in the first place. But you don't have to justify why you seek something that's public. You just ask for a copy.
There's something else that you mentioned to me when we were talking about this before we came on the podcast, and that was that if you can, it's best to have the information before you ask for it, because then you know whether they're giving you the real information or not. So in some cases, you may make a public records request to verify something for the purposes of actually catching them out.
Yes. Well, in the case of your story where the person had a copy already or had a photograph that it existed, maybe they didn't have a copy of the full document, but just had the front page. And then when they try to say it doesn't exist, you go, well, yeah, it does. Here's a picture of it. But there might be other surrounding documents or attachments that you don't have. And when they just deny it all exists, then you've got a little bit of ammo there to say, no, you're lying. And if we're going to end up in court with this, your lie is going to look really bad. So,
yes, you don't say we are going to end up in court. You say if we were to end up in court, because you don't want to give them any excuse.
That's right. So that's a little bit of an edgy game. You don't want to threaten litigation because, as you said, then everything becomes attorney-private client privilege on their end. And they can say that it's all in closed session. They won't talk about it anymore. Don't ever threaten to go to court unless you're going to go to court.
But in fact, I always go ahead. Sorry.
Even if you are going to go to court, don't threaten until you've gone several rounds and you're just not getting anywhere. But once you threaten to go to court, be ready to follow through, because you look like a fool if you go in and say, well, I'm going to sue you, and you never do. Mm-hmm. Then they'll just learn that person isn't going to make good on their threats. And so now they're just going to ignore you even more and say, yeah, don't give them those documents. They're not going to sue us. He's going to make noise and threaten to sue, but he won't.
And in fact, with government, I would say the one thing you should never do is make threats for several reasons. If you make threats when you're speaking during public comment, as we've already said, if you're threatening to sue, then all of a sudden they shut down all the transparency, or they can. Yep. They should, in fact. And if you threaten anything a little bit more scary, then they can throw you out. They can have the police throw you out because it's dangerous. And you mentioned credibility. So don't ever threaten government. Don't. And if you do, make sure that you're not threatening, but you're just telling them what you're going to do.
Yep. Don't threaten.
And there are other ways to create something which is a threat to them without actually threatening. So this kind of a public records request is one. Having a lot of people from the public there worried about something becomes a threat, because they know, and that's, of course, in assuming bad government, not good government, because there is good government as well. And if there's nothing wrong, they should just give you the information. If you get it too easily, you could, I suppose, be suspicious. But if you get the information you need without fuss, sometimes there's nothing there to worry about, or either that or the people giving it to you don't know there's something there to worry about. So thank you for that, Kevin, because I'm actually making some notes to this and improving this template, which I had typed based on ones you've done before. So thank you for that. And it will all be up on the website if anyone wants to download it. And there's
nothing magic about my template, by the way. And there's plenty of room for improvement. But what I've done and experienced has gone into that. And so every point in my template tries to make it clear in advance to these games that they play, to where they can't say, oh, we didn't know this or didn't know that. It tries to close all the questions and the loopholes in the beginning so you get a better response. But it could certainly be improved. The downside of my template is it's very legal and very formal, and that tends to make people nervous. And if you think it's something that's very easy to get, maybe you don't need to send such a formal, lengthy letter, at least not first round. So you got to use a little prudence and say, oh, you could just email the clerk and say, can you send me a copy of the accounting numbers that were discussed at the city council meeting last night? And if you got a good relationship with that clerk, you don't need to make all this legal threat. You just ask for it and they produce it. But if you know it's going to be a little bit of a fight, then it's good to be more formal.
Well, you make another point there, and that is a good relationship with the clerk. It's always beneficial to maintain good relationships as far as you can for the next request, if you have a next one.
Right. So if you're an activist or a watchdog, you build the relationships with the people that you can. Typically, your clerk is your neutral Switzerland person, because their job is to just compile the board minutes and the documents, and you get a good relationship with the clerk and they're happy to give you stuff. Your not neutral ground is going to be your legislator that has a different agenda than you do, or some agency official who doesn't really want you meddling in what he's trying to accomplish. And so if you can send your records requests with the more friendly, neutral people, you might be able to get something. And then ultimately, you're going to want to know something that only that less neutral person has. And, you're going to have to fight or push to get it. But it's the more relationships you have established, the better you can go in and tailor your requests to get what you want.
So then now we're getting into the body of this, and I don't,
Okay.
it's something that's difficult to discuss without having it in front of you. So folks may really want to download it. I call it the unassailable public records request. And I probably should qualify that and say one of the best unassailable public records requests, because as Kevin's telling you, nothing is unassailable. As if your local government wants to break the law, they'll break the law. And so it won't be unassailable, but it's much better than most.
Let's also point out that there are many exemptions to public records, and attorney-client privilege is one. If an agency is being sued, you can't demand to see their secret strategy notes, because they have a right to keep their legal strategy in-house. There are privacy issues. You can't demand to see copies of everybody's paychecks. You can demand to know how much somebody's been paid, but you can't get to see how many withholdings they take. And there are many, many exemptions, especially in California. There's just dozens of them. But generally, everywhere you're going to find out that things that are under police investigation are not public, and you don't have a right to those things. Things that involve somebody's personal privacy, you don't have a right to those things. But they can often come down to a weighing out the equities. So if somebody is threatening to sue the city, or somebody is personally going to benefit by applying for a business license, then public knowledge might outweigh their right to privacy in those cases. And then that can go to court as well. So just know you're not entitled to everything. And it's helpful to focus your request as narrowly as possible. And I think we're going to get into that here, because
I'll start with that. So, and again, this is very formal language, but you start your letter saying pursuant to the California Public Records Act, and then you note that what the government code for that is. This is a request for disclosure of public records from your office. And so interrupt me, Kevin, I'm going to read, and I may stop, but if you need to interrupt me on any of this, please do.
So that's just formally setting out that this is a formal public records request under this California law, so that nobody can refute that later on, like, oh, we just thought Kevin was asking for something and we didn't realize he was really asking for it as a records request. And so that, again, most of the things in here cut them off at the knees from having an excuse later on of, oh, we didn't know we're supposed to treat that as a full formal record request. Yeah, you did. It's the first sentence. And so I
Right.
cite
I said so.
California's law. So if you're in another state, look up your law and cite that law right at the top. Hey, this is a formal request.
And looking up these days is so easy. All you need to do is just Google. If you just Google Public Records Act, Iowa, or you'll probably have a lot of things come up that will give you the information you need. And the best source is always going to state agency. So it would be the state of Iowa, because they're going to have the most current updates. And often the websites are very well laid out. And they probably even have a section on how to make a public records request of a local agency. And often the state rules for transparency, I won't say the rules, sort of the rules, the laws may be different on a state level than they are on a local level. So that's something to watch out for as well, but for the most part, we're dealing with local agencies. We're dealing with things that affect your day-to-day life and things that you actually can make a difference in. Not saying you can't in the others, but it's a lot easier on the local level to make a difference. So your next paragraph is, in enacting the CPRA, and that's the California Public Records Act, the legislature finds and declares that access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business is a fundamental and necessary right of every person in this state. Speaks for itself. You've mentioned it before.
It does, but what it also says is I don't have to be a resident of any town USA to have a right to see documents there. I can make a request of any agency or any city in California, and as a citizen of California, and really as a citizen of the United States, or even as a non-citizen. I mean, that the jurisprudence that's involved there is basically everybody has a right to see anything that's public. And that's putting them on notice, reminding them that they have an obligation to produce it.
Okay. And then you say further, the California Constitution declares the people have the right of access to information concerning the conduct of the people's business, and therefore the meetings of the public bodies and the writings of public officials and agencies shall be open to public scrutiny. Again,
restating that, hey, this is a constitutional right in the state of California to have access to this. And don't screw with me. I know I've got a right to have it.
Then you move into the body of what you're requesting, and you say the following records are requested. And this is where it's probably helpful, but I'm going to just read it for you to say some more. The number one, all writings, and then you footnote that and make a note of the government code defining the word writing. I'll read that later. All writings pertaining to whatever it is you're looking for, or any other proximal matter in regards or relating to the name of the agency from the start date you're seeking information to the end date. So you tell them the agency you're looking for and the information you're looking for. And you say disclosure is requested to include, but not limited to, writings pertaining to any of the following. And then you list the things that you want. And it's good to be as specific as possible, but on the other hand, you need to be a little bit general because you don't want to miss something that you might want. So let me read this government code because it'll be similar across the board. Writing means any handwriting, typewriting, printing, photostating, photographing, photocopying, transmitting by electric mail or fax, and every other means of recording upon any tangible thing. Oh, got something else here. And any form of communication or representation, including letters, words, pictures, sounds, or symbols, or combinations thereof, and any record thereby created, regardless of the matter in which the record has been stored. So some states will have they'll have different wording, but basically they have to give you everything.
Yeah, and so that's my lawyer hat on. I use the word writing because that's what's in the California Public Records Act. And then I go farther and put a little footnote to remind them that a writing is basically everything. That could include an audio recording, a crayon drawing, a hieroglyphic carved in a stone by your mayor. Those are all writings. And by using that word, I'm invoking something that in court couldn't later be confused to say, oh, we didn't know that audio recording he was asking because he just asked for writings. So I remind them that writings includes all those things. In other states, maybe your public records laws aren't as drawn out as California's. But if somebody's gone to court or somebody will go to court and the court's going to say, yeah, that's a public record. So however you say it, just make sure it's clear that you're asking for anything that might exist or you think might exist. Now, there's no need to do this. If you know it's just on paper, just say, give me a copy. But if you're looking for all of the mayor's conversations with the developer, then that could have been a answering machine voice message, could be a text message, an email. Of course, verbal conversations aren't recorded, so those aren't public records. And that's one of the ways they evade. They get together in person and they don't have to create a record.
So one thing you can do is if you don't know the code or you don't want to be that formal, you can list those things. By writings, I mean blah, 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 and list all of the things without putting in the code, just explaining what you mean.
Well, look, the courts are required to interpret a request broadly. So you could have a one sentence public records request and just say, I'm requesting copies of all the mayor's conversations with the developer. And that should mean everything. But again, I'm trying to close loopholes in advance of, oh, we didn't know you meant text messages too. So you spell all those things out and say, no, I mean text messages.
So if you get to the level of writing a letter like this, it's because you're being obstructed, basically, or you're
anticipating being obstructed.
Right. So once you've made the list of everything that you want, then you say any communication or writing involving any person, public or private, involving the above or any proximal matter, to include writings involving any, then you put the agency's name, or staff, put the staff name, consultant, supplier, contractor, or legislative board member. So you're just listing all the people who might be involved and have to provide that information if they have it. Is that right?
Yeah, just trying to be clear that I mean, like everything that has to do with this subject, I want it all from whoever it went through. And that's where it gets really touchy, because you don't want to make a records request asking for a copy of their entire file cabinet of City Hall.
Oh,
so you're trying to be as narrow as possible while not ruling, while also being broad at the same time. And it's, it's a judgment call, but let me state it this way. If you know you're seeking one document, ask for that one document. Because if you go too broad, they're going to say, well, it's going to take us 3 months to dig up all this information that you're asking for, and you're not going to get it quickly. So you want to be as narrow as possible, because you'll have the best chance of getting the 2 or 3 things that you're really wanting without 100 other things that slow down your request. Now, again, if you're really thinking there might be 100 things you want out there, that's when I say send 2 requests. Send the first one really narrow. Maybe you get the big hot button items that you're looking for quickly, then send another request saying, okay, yeah, I know there's more out there. Give me the rest. Because they will use that. Maybe they don't produce everything until it's all together, which I think is one of the issues I touch on my letter, is say, give it to me as you find it. Don't wait till all the items are together to give it to me 3 months from now.
That's a good point. So, and I think the law says that they do have to do that. If I'm remembering from
Depends
my
on
reading.
the law. California, it's funny. California has some of the worst reputation of the worst laws in the country. But sometimes it pays off. And with the California Public Records Act and the California Brown Act, which is about transparent government meetings, we have some of the best laws because they've been worked over so many times that they're very expansive and developed. And you might go into a state where the Records Act in that state is very thin and doesn't really spell out all of your rights the way California does. But I can assure you, you will have mostly the same rights. It just might not be spelled out. It might have to go to court for a court to later on rule. Yeah, we think electronic documents do have to be disclosed, but it might not be spelled out as transparently as California's done.
So again, you can spell out all these codes that you're referencing without referencing them as California code. Just spell out that the information that they include.
Yeah, look up your. I would browse through my state's records laws and see what's there and compare it. And if it's not there, it doesn't mean you can't ask for it. You say, I want a copy of the electronic Excel file. And if your state's laws don't require electronic disclosure, maybe there's a battle there, but I think you have a right to it, even if it's not in state law.
Okie dokie. Now, I may have already covered this one, so tell me if I've done it, but you write the purpose of the request is to obtain information pertaining to the public interest and the people's business is conducted by the agency, board, contractors, service providers, legal advisors, staff, and employees. The necessity of this request is to obtain documents and correspondence related to your subject and meetings and writings of public officials and agencies. Have we covered all of that, or was there anything more to add?
Well, it's funny because earlier I said you're not obligated to say the purpose of your request. But you notice I didn't really say that in that statement. The purpose of the request is to obtain information so that we can know what our government's doing. I'm not saying the purpose of the request is so I can catch you out or,
review the docs or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Ultimately, even though they aren't allowed to ask you the purpose, if you go into court, they're going to say, well, we think you're going to get this list together to harass these people. So I'm kind of short stopping again there and saying the purpose of this request is to shed light and transparency and know what's going on.
Okay. And along those lines, you then say you were encouraged to contact me regarding scope of this request if you have any questions.
Yes. So when you don't know what documents or records exist, like I said, you don't want to write your request so narrow that maybe they can come up with a reason not to give you something. Well, you didn't ask for that. So you write a broader request saying, give me all of anything that relates to this issue. Well, maybe that's a whole file cabinet's worth of stuff. And so there is a requirement to assist the requester in California. And I usually include that in my records requests. But I also encourage them to contact me because if they call me and they say, hey, Kevin, you realize this request really ends up targeting these 1,000 files. And we don't think you want those 1,000 files. And it's going to be a long time for us to put all those files together and go into our archives. I say, please contact me if you think there's too much or if it's too confusing. And you tell me, well, these files exist. And I go, no, I don't want all that, but give me this because that'll make your job easier. If we could just talk on the phone for a minute and say, oh, that exists. No, I don't want that. I don't need all that. You don't need to go through all the trouble for that. But I do want those other 5 things that we talked about. Just give me those 5 and I'll be happy. Well, that makes life easy on both of us. And so I always invite people to call me if they have any questions so that we can make the request easier on both of us. Or maybe they'll call and say, did you know about this? And, oh, no, I didn't. I want that too. You could go the other way as well.
That's right. They can actually be helpful. And in fact, they're required to be helpful.
They are required to be helpful in California. They're required, because not everybody's good at this. and you ask for something that's a little confusing or doesn't match their terminology on their end. And they said, "Did you mean all the tax records or just the fee records?" And you go, "Well, what's the difference?" And then they explain it to you. "Oh yeah, just the fee records." So there's a requirement for them to assist you and for you to have a chance to clarify what you're seeking.
And your next paragraph is something we have talked about at the very beginning. Where disclosable records are held in an electronic format by your agency, disclosure is requested to be in electronic format. Electronic disclosure is requested to be transmitted via electronic mail. Where electronic mail is not possible, e.g. in the case of large files, delivery may be effected via optical disc, common internet protocols, or by other stipulated arrangement. I'm pleased to provide blank media upon request. If you are unable to deliver via email, please contact me at the text, telephone, or email numbers noted above, and I will arrange to pick up the information.
Okay, so there's a lot of little pieces there. Generally, I don't want paper because I don't want 500 pages dropped in my lap. I may only be interested in a couple, 3 pages out of some document that I'm asking for anyway. And because I try to keep records on my computer, if they hand me a 500-page document, I'm inclined to then scan the 500 pages, which is a lot of work, and I'm end up throwing it away, and nobody wants to just waste paper. So I say, just send me a copy of the PDF file. That's what I really want. Then that other language, well, some agencies might be willing to burn you a CD-ROM. That's a little passe. 10 years ago, that was kind of a bigger deal. But I'll say, yeah, if you want to give me a CD-ROM, that's great, if that's easy for you. If you want to put it on a USB thumb drive, I'll give you one and you can copy it over. Or if you want to just give it to me, some agencies might just give you a free thumb drive because they're not very expensive. And then common internet protocols. What does that mean? Well, that's kind of my lawyer hedge bet for, well, that could be over some sort of file transfer or a web page or a Google Drive or all these other storage drives that are out there now where they send you a link to where to download your files and some mechanism. Because if you're asking for certain records, maybe they don't want to send it through email because email is not secure. It's not encrypted. People that know about internet privacy know that emails can be read by any of the parties between you and the other person, whether it's Google on Gmail or the internet provider itself can scan all those things as they're coming through. We don't want to send these sensitive documents through email, but we'll put it on an encrypted web downlink. But my demand is like, give it to me electronically, because it takes away their opportunity to say, well, we're going to charge you 10 cents a page for photocopies, or it's going to take us a week to make photocopies, or you got to drive in here to pick it up in person. When I know they could just to Kevin Rice attach and send in 5 minutes and be done with. And that's what you really want, is you want to get your documents quickly. So give it to me the way you have it.
The catch-22 for the government agencies is they can charge you for the cost of the copy, but they can't charge you for their time. And
Right.
If they're trying to be efficient and effective with their time, then electronic is better. And but don't let them, if you have to do paper or anyway, do not let them charge you for their time. They cannot do that.
Right. And don't let them bully you into their process. So when you make a records request, sometimes they'll hand you a form and say, oh, you have to fill out our form.
No, you don't.
You don't have to. Now, if you, there's no reason to be a jerk and not fill out their form. If that's what makes life easy for them, fill it out. But you don't have to fill out their form. And if they say, well, we only provide documents, photocopies on Fridays, no, don't let them bully you around. Say, no, just email me the 30 megabyte PDF file and make that clear to them. You might have to do some teaching and some pushing, but you're helping everybody later on if you make them realize, hey, you know what? Yeah, we have to do this via email if they ask. And oh, wait, this is actually easier and quicker for us instead of printing copies.
And then your final paragraph, you tell them, in the event any portion of the above request does not effectively describe a reasonably identifiable record, your agency is requested to, and this is in quotes, assist the member of the public to identify records and information that are responsive to the request or to the purpose of the request, end quote, and to, quote, provide suggestions for overcoming any practical basis for denying access to the records or information sought. And then you quote the code and say, it underlined, a public agency is required to make a reasonable effort to elicit additional clarifying information from the requester. And we've covered that, but that really spells it out well.
It does. And again, it mentions purpose. So again, I don't have to mention my purpose is to whatever my plan is. But when I mention purpose, I say, I want to know how much it really costs to issue dog licenses or to run a traffic signal on this corner. And so then when I say it, I'm seeking anything towards that purpose, it's actually expanding my request, because I can then say, well, does this document go towards me knowing how much it costs to issue dog licenses? Then you should include that in what I'm seeking. So it's kind of a way of saying, even though I didn't mention this thing that I didn't even know about, you should know right there that, oh, that goes towards the purpose, and it's also included. It should be included in the request.
And you sign off sincerely with your name and then a CC. And you had said at one point there are people you should CC. So when we're CCing, are you talking about your people or their people, or what do you mean there?
Their people. Mm-hmm. So again, I usually generally target or send it to the person that actually has the documents, whether that's a department head or a senior department person. But then I want to CC and make sure their department head knows that this record request exists. Maybe send it to the agency attorney or the agency executive. In the case of seeking administrative stuff like finance documents, I'll send it to the finance clerk that I know has it on her computer, but maybe she feels like she doesn't have the authority to just send stuff out. So I'll also send a copy to the finance manager and to the head of the agency or the agency's attorney, so that everybody sees it all at once. If I'm seeking a board or city council document, then it'll usually go to the city clerk or county clerk, and then a copy to the president of the board or the agency attorney, or maybe the city manager or county executive officer. So
what if
to everybody at once?
So what if you're sending the request to multiple people and you want to see what each one gives you back? Now, I can see there's an argument for not wasting government time. You don't want everybody to be working on the same thing. Right. But on the other hand, there may be a reason to do that. Would you then CC? I mean, would you then actually write on your letter that you've CC'd everybody?
So no, I wouldn't, but there's a couple possibilities there. Let's say I believe that two city council members are corresponding amongst each other, which they have a right to do. Mm-hmm. If you send a records request to that city council person, they're usually going to forward it on to the city manager or the city attorney. And so if you send them out blindly, they're going to get found. That city council person isn't just going to send it back to you what you want, although they could. There's no need to send it on. But typically they have sort of a process they have to go through, and the city attorney is going to want to be knowledgeable of what records requests are coming in. And so if you send it to separately blindly to two city council members, you're going to get found out that you're doing that.
Right.
So I would just typically send one request to this city clerk and the city attorney and say, I'm looking for all correspondence between these two people. Now,
that's a good point. Thank you.
If it's between a mayor and a county level person, that's two different agencies. So in that case, yes, I wouldn't openly CC it to both sides. I would send a request to the city for mayor's correspondence, and then I'd send a separate letter to the county for that county person's correspondence, and then see what comes out the other end and see if everybody's being transparent. Oftentimes, the word will get back to the mayor, and the word will get back to the council or the county level person. Hey, we got a request in for all this stuff. And then they'll end up calling each other, and they're going to know about it anyway. But it's one way you could do things. Like I said previously, if two cities are working on a project together, you send a separate request to either one. Maybe one's more forthcoming than the other, and you got a shot at getting more info that way. Or you might just get two copies of the same exact thing from both places.
Yeah. So that's the end of the letter, and we've been talking for quite a while, so people have probably had about enough here. But is there anything else that you feel like we need to add about public records requests? Any stories or any other further information for folks?
I could go on with stories, I'm sure. Browse through your local public records laws, whether it's California or another state, or federal with the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. Everybody does a little different. Be friendly, try to figure out how they work, and try to work with them so that they don't automatically dislike you out the gate. Some agencies will share your requests with the world. Freedom of Information Act's requests, the feds will send you back an email saying your request is available at this website where you can download it. Well, on that website is everybody's FOIA requests. And that's a way for other watchdogs then to see what the other watchdogs are looking into. And it's just the more transparency, the better. If the agency you're seeking info from is, let's say, a larger, more developed agency, they're more likely to have a process like that. If it's a small agency with 3 people in the office, you're more likely going to have problems with them understanding that they're required to respond to these things. And you might have to tug at them and work with them, or urge their agency attorney to inform them that they have to produce documents.
Because what I find far too often is that people get on boards that have very strict bylaws, very strict constitutions. There's a game plan, there's a rule. There are many about how you can freely and fairly operate the public's business. But a lot of them don't read that, don't understand that, and think of it as maybe another Rotary Club board. And the rules are very, very different between public and private. But a lot of people will get on these boards or even be employed who think they can make up the rules and never bother to read or understand the rules. So it's good to reiterate it. And it's good to understand that there is there's that block that we often find. Understand
your rights. And when you start hearing things like, well, yes, I know, but we have our own policy here.
Or, we interpret the law differently.
Right.
That's the one my friend got yesterday.
Yes, that exists, but we have our own policy, and you have to say, no, well, you can have policies, but you can't just write a policy that abridges somebody's rights to have a public records request. Or
yes, they can't override. They can't override the law. And usually when you're dealing with a city or a county is a division of the state. So the law that dictates is going to be the state law. And for the counties and cities, it's state law also. But that overrides. So your rights override anything they may try to make up.
That's correct. Ultimately, they can do anything to you that they want to do until you're willing to go to court. So if you know you're not willing or can't afford to go to court, be nice as you can, because that's as far as you're going to get is by being nice. And after that, you're just done.
Well, you're
unless
done
you-
with the public records request, but you can involve the press, you can involve other people
Yes.
if it's something that's serious, and there are other ways to influence. But this is absolutely critical, especially when you suspect something. So, Kevin, thank you so much, not just
Thank
for
you.
today, but for all the years that you've counseled me and so many others who need to understand the Public Records Act and so many other things about local government. I'm really grateful to you for that. And also want to thank Purple Banter, LJ Stead, for hosting us today and for the editing, and invite everyone to go to my website, debbiepeterson.com, DebbiePeterson.com, and you can download this. And there's also a lot more information on local government and how to be an effective citizen. Thanks a lot, everybody, and we'll catch up with you soon.